We are studying this morning in Genesis chapter 22, and a really powerful story. The great man Abraham has been blessed with the son of promise, Isaac. In Genesis 22, and beginning there in verse 1, the old translation reads, "And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here am I. He said, Take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." It's an extraordinary statement. One of the things that strikes us is this expression, God tempted Abraham. The verb to tempt suggests the idea to prove or to test. It does not demand that God is trying to trip Abraham or that there's any evil motive involved. Sometimes we think of the word tempt that way. But the idea here is that God put Abraham to the test. And that's not unique to the New Testament or the Old Testament for that matter. We can read about such things. The example of Paul and the thorn in the flesh, the story of Job. God allowed people, good people, to face challenges and trials, and the purpose of that always was, I think, to bring something good out of them. I love the story there in Matthew chapter 15. It seems like a cruel story when the Syrophoenician woman comes asking for help, and Jesus at first does not answer her, and then the disciples chime in and say, "Send her away, she's troubling us, she's an outsider," and then finally, the Lord says to her, "It's not fit to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs." Why would he do all that? He hated her. No, he didn't hate her. He loved her. But he was drawing good out of her. And of course, you have to see the whole story. Great is thy faith. Be it to thee even as thou wilt. She's a great woman, and Jesus knows that. Why was Job allowed to be tested? Maybe I don't know the answer to that, but one thing that's obvious is that when you read through the story of Job, he starts a great man. I think he ends a greater man. And so God has a plan here. And it's easy for us to get very sure of ourselves about what God ought to be doing. We don't know what God ought to do. God knows, and he teaches us what ought means. And so that's just one point that we consider as we begin this story. He goes, where is he going to go to offer this offering? What does the text tell us here? Moriah. The only time that word is used other than this passage is over in 2 Chronicles 3 and verse 1. You probably have a note in your Bible about that. And that passage says that Solomon began building the temple, the Lord's temple in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David, Araunah's threshing floor, it's associated with the place where the temple was. I don't know exactly. If you go over there today and look at the Temple Mount, the old Temple Mount, you'll see the Dome of the Rock. That's that building, the very distinctive building that's built on that plateau. And that is a Muslim building. It's a mosque. But inside of it, there's a big rock slab, which tradition claims that's where Abraham offered Isaac. So is that true? I don't know. But it seems to be in that area. Maybe that's also intentional. Because, why would God have Abraham go all that way? You see the map here from Beersheba up to around Jebus, as it would have been called there, Moriah. Why would he go that far? 45, 50 miles? He could have done what the text says here some other place. I think there has to be a symbolic aspect to this, doesn't it? The place of the sacrifice, the place where the Son of God would be sacrificed. So anyway, the stage is set now. So going back to the story in chapter 22 and in verse 3, Abraham rose up early in the morning. You just find that to be, I don't know, maybe I'm making more out of that, but I think others have noticed it too. even when he has the most difficult chore to do, if it's from God, he rises up early to accomplish it, no matter how displeasing it might be. And we can try to imagine what's been going on in Abraham's mind as God tells him now to sacrifice this son of promise that he's waited for his whole life, and that God promised would be the one through whom all the world would be blessed. So he rises up early in the morning and saddles his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and wood for the burnt offering. And he rose up and he went to the place which God told him. Took several days. Verse 4 says, on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. Now verse 5. And Abraham said unto his young men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and will come again to you. I'm sure, like me, you've read that verse many times and marvel at the faith of Abraham. He tells these young men, we'll be back. Had he forgotten what God commanded? No, he hadn't forgotten. The best explanation, I suppose, is that passage in Hebrews 11. Somebody want to read Hebrews 11:19 for us? Hebrews 11 and verse 19, where the Hebrew writer, I suppose, gets into the mind of Abraham and what he might have been thinking when he would have uttered words like this.
Concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense.
Yeah. By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. And he that received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him from the dead. I don't think he knew exactly what was going to happen. But one thing he knew that if God told him this and told him that, they would work together some way. Isn't that what faith is, by the way? Faith is not blind trust in somebody we don't know. But when you know God, then you believe that he tells the truth. And so that was Abraham's, I think, great gift. It's his willingness to say, God will provide. God will provide. So, back in our text. Verse 6, I'm sorry. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. By the way, we're not sure exactly how old Isaac was here. At least I'm not sure how old he was. But, he wasn't 3 or 4 years old, was he? He could make this long journey. He could carry the wood. He could talk to his father like an adult. So, I don't know exactly how old he was, but let's suppose he was in his teens, maybe mid-teens. But he's carrying the wood now. And he took the fire in his hand and the knife, and they went both of them together. And then verse 7. Doesn't this rip your heart out? Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Obviously, Abraham has not confided at this point to Isaac what's going on or what he's been asked to do. But verse 8, Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. And so they went both of them together. And they came to the place which God had told them of. And Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. A couple of things that strike us. Number one, obviously at some point, Isaac begins to understand what's going on. And it seems that he is also not resisting what's going on. I don't know how old he was, but I'm sure that given the circumstance, he could have escaped or tried to escape, I guess. That none of that is found here. He obeyed. Verse 10. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. And then verse 11, the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. Let me pause again. Somebody said that Genesis 22 contains the hardest command that God ever gave a human being, and the easiest command that God ever gave a human being. This would be the easiest, wouldn't it? Do not harm your son. No problem. The latter part of verse 12 reads, For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. This does not question God's omniscience, but it is to say that God gives human beings an opportunity to show who they are. Didn't he do that with Sodom? Don't you think that's what he meant when he said, I'm going to send these men down there and we'll see? This is your chance to show who you are. And by the way, not to go to preaching here, but don't we do that every day in some way? Maybe today, there may be something in your life today that will be a critical decision that will show who you are, show who I am. We got to think about it that way. The day before, Abraham had no idea what God would ask him. But when he asked, Abraham answered. And the second day and the third day, he didn't change his mind. And even to the point where he took the knife, he was willing to do whatever God said. That's faith. Now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son. Verse 13, Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by the horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh. Jehovah-Jireh, the Lord will see, or the Lord will provide, maybe more specifically. And to this day, in the mount of the Lord, it shall be seen, Moses writes. So, it's obvious, isn't it, that in one sense, when you read this story, that Isaac is a type of Christ. Isn't that reasonable? A lot of people through the years have made points along this line. He's a child of promise, a miraculous birth, mocked. He carried the wood to the altar, voluntarily submitted, bound, offered, dead, at least in Abraham's mind, 3 days. Can you imagine what was going through Abraham's mind? Raised then, as far as Abraham was concerned, by God's sparing him. And you think about the Lord, the child of promise, the miraculous, in fact, in his case, the virgin birth, mocked by the worldly, carried his cross to Calvary, submitted voluntarily, nailed to the cross, sacrificed there, dead 3 days and raised from the dead. So in one sense, I think it's fair to say that Isaac is a type of Christ. And I think that has to be one of the reasons why all this took place, is to be a type and to teach us about the ultimate sacrifice. In another sense, I think Isaac is a type of humanity as a whole. He's a type of all of us. Because instead of being offered, a substitute is found in his place. And isn't that what Christ has done for all of us? So I think both those lessons are true. But you know, what I didn't think about for a long time is that it's not Isaac that is highlighted here, is it? Who's in the spotlight in this story? Abraham. Abraham. So with all the types here that we can recognize of Isaac as being a type of Christ and a type of ourselves, it's really this focus on the Father that seems to be the emphasis of the passage. And in this case, if we think of this as a type, for whom is Abraham a type? He's a type of the Heavenly Father, isn't he? For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. And we can talk for a long time, and rightly so, and the Bible does, about the sacrifice of Jesus and His willingness to come and be that sacrifice. Amen. But I think this story maybe reminds us of the sacrifice of the Father in seeing His Son suffer. And why did all that happen according to John 3:16? He loved you. That's the only reason. When Isaiah writes in Isaiah 53, it pleased the Lord to bruise Him, it was only in reference to the result. There was no pleasure taken in the suffering, but it was worth it. That's the great, I think, story that we can learn, reminded of in this account, this amazing account in Genesis 22. Let me pause there. If you have a question or point. Yes, sir.
Think back what God had already told Abraham, and He told him through his seed, all would be blessed. He thought, well, Ishmael, old as I am, he said, no, son, your son will be born. And He told him through, I think it was in chapter 17, through your descendants, through his descendants, all those. Well, if he were to kill him, if he were to die, that would make null and void what God already told him. I think that also plays into the fact of Abraham's faith.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Very true. Anybody? Yes, sir.
I think as you've already so well pointed out, there's a lot going on for us to learn from this. One thing I think of when I just think of that first verse, you read it, it's almost like, you could come away with the idea that after all this time, God's now testing Abraham. I feel like God's been testing Abraham all along. But like you said, I think God's doing this for Abraham's benefit too. Not only just all that stuff you just got to talking about that's going on, but He's bringing Abraham, and He has been bringing Abraham along all this time. And it's just a multifaceted thing that God's doing.
And you make a good point too. Abraham's no rookie.
Right.
So what if God decides to test an old head like me tomorrow? What am I going to say about that? Well, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I'm looking around. I think He's tested everybody in this room.
Yeah.
Already.
And maybe today's another one, And if it is, I can't say, well, I'm past that. Abraham wasn't past that. But God knows best. That's a great point. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Do you think with Isaac being in verse 12 it said, you have not withheld your son, your only son, being that Isaac is the promised one, is that the reason they call him his only son?
Yes, sir. I think so. He's the only son of promise. That's right. He had other children. He had a number of other children by the time it was over. Isaac wasn't the first. But that's right. I think you're exactly right. That's the son of promise. Yes, sir.
It directly parallels God.
Yeah.
The Bible itself tells us Adam was the son of God.
Right.
So this is Jesus is not God's first son, but He is the son of promise.
Yeah.
It is a very direct parallel. Also, like we haven't quite got there yet, but there's a new part added to the promise there at the end of verse 17, as we see that makes this parallel all the more interesting, really and clear, and that this was the one who was going to bring about that was not going to be one that would not be willing to give up anything for God, because God here is showing He's willing to give up anything for man.
Right.
So that's the kind of person that He wants to be the head of this family that's going to bring that son into the world.
Let's read verse 15. The angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, For because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. And so Abraham returned unto his young men. And they rose up, and they went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. But he did not, in some ways, come back the same man, I think. I think he had to come back stronger. He had to come back deeper in his commitment with a different perspective. That's what trials do for us. They make us different people in some ways if we handle them right. And if we handle them wrong, I hope they motivate us. You had a point about that. Go ahead, Marcus.
That's what I was saying. Thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And this is part of the whole thing of Christ. On the rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it.
Yeah.
This is a promise as I see it here. There is no other way to interpret this, not when you look at all of it.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a promise of the ultimate victory, isn't it, of this seed. I think you make a good point. Well, finishing out the chapter, it's curious. After this exciting chapter, we have what seems to be a curious note about Abraham's kinfolks that don't even live around the area. It came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah, she hath also borne children unto thy brother Nahor, Hus the firstborn, Bus the brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, and Kesed, and Hasso, and Pildash, and Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel begat Rebekah, and now we begin to maybe understand why we're told all this. These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, that is, Bethuel had a concubine as well, whose name was Rumah. She bare also Teba, and Gaham, and Thahash, and Maacah. So, why would this be of relevance? Because here, as we divide it in a couple of chapters, we're going to be reading about this family again, and about these are the people from whom, of course, the wife of Isaac will be found. Questions or points about chapter 22? Let's look at chapter 23. And I suppose that if we were to label the chapter, we would say it is about the death and burial of Sarah. The chapter begins, and Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died in Kirhath Arba. The same is Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. It's really interesting to me. First of all, this great woman, she was a great woman. Her long life comes to an end here. And what a life she had. And what a contribution she made to the story. And her faith was also a part of God's being able to use her and to bless so many. So we're thankful for the faith of Sarah. But it is a brief account, isn't it, about what must have been a very traumatic moment. This chapter is, 20 verses? And 18 of them are taken up with the burial of Sarah and the place of burial, and 2 with that way. I'm not sure that I know why that is, but I do think there's an emphasis placed upon not just the death of Sarah, but the burial of Sarah. Let's read a little more about this story in verse 3. And Abraham stood up from before the dead and spake unto the sons of Heth, This seems to be a southern branch of the Hittites, going back to Genesis 10. The sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Isn't that interesting, too? He recognizes the fact that I don't own this land. You all own it. I'm here with you. But I need a place to bury my dead. That's what he's coming to them about. And there's a sense of urgency in that because, after all, for the most part, the Jews didn't embalm the dead. And I think they're Orthodox, the most strict Orthodox maybe still don't do that. I may be wrong about that, but that's what I understand. So, obviously, it would be the norm for the death of a person and their burial to be the same day. So anyway, Abraham goes to these people and he says to them, I want to buy a burial place that I may bury my dead out of my sight. Well, verse 5, and there's this really interesting point, this courtesy and ceremony as these Abraham and these locals go back and forth in their, I don't guess you call it negotiation or whatever it might be, but the process of purchasing a place. The children of Heth answered Abraham, saying, Hear us, my Lord, thou art a mighty prince among us. Anybody have another translation of the word mighty prince?
Mine says Prince of God.
Yeah, the word Elohim is actually the word for mighty there. So Prince of Elohim, we might say. So that's interesting too. I think one of the reasons why they had such a regard for Abraham is not just because he was obviously successful materially, but people knew this is God's man. And they'd seen enough about God. So anyway, mighty prince, in our choice of our sepulchres, bury thy dead. None of us shall withhold from thee his sepulchre, but that thou mayest bury thy dead. Then Abraham stands up, and he bows himself to the people, even to the children of Heth, and he communed with them, saying, If it be your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat for me to Ephron, the son of Zohar. He's the guy that owns the thing that owns the site that Abraham has in mind. Go talk to Ephron for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he hath, which is in the end of his field. For as much money as it is worth, he shall give it me for a possession, for a burying place amongst you. And Ephron dwelt among the children of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the audience of the children of Heth, even of all that went in at the gate of the city, saying, O nay, my Lord, hear me, the field I give thee, and the cave that is therein. I give it thee in the presence of the sons of my people, will I give it thee, bury thy dead. For a long time I read this and I didn't know, maybe I'm missing something, or maybe I'm reading it into here something. But what is it that Abraham wants from Ephron? What does he say? He wants the cave at the end of the field, which almost implies he's saying, look, it won't bother your field. I just want the cave at the end of your field. What does Ephron offer? The cave and the field. So while this seems to be very polite and very deferential, actually, Ephron's doing some hard negotiating here, saying, I don't want to sell you the cave and not the field. So, and I think Abraham picked up on that. Abraham, verse 12, bowed himself down before the people, and he spake to Ephron of the audience of the people of the land, and he said, If thou wilt give it, I pray thee, hear me. I will give thee money for the field. Take it, and I will bury my dead there. So Abraham now is in the field buying business because that's what's being offered. And Ephron answered Abraham, saying, My Lord, hearken unto me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver, but what is that betwixt me and thee? Bury therefore thy dead. What does that mean? I'll sell you that for 400 shekels of silver. And, by the way, I don't know exactly how much the that would be worth today? You may have a footnote. I think those guys sometimes are guessing too. But he weighs out silver ultimately in the price of 400 shekels. I did remember that over in, is it 2 Samuel 24? We were talking about that a moment ago, weren't we? We came to Moriah. The field that David bought from Arona, he said, I can't take this field for nothing if I offer it to God. So what did he pay for that? 50 shekels of silver. Well, this is a lot more. I don't know how big the field was. Maybe it's worth a lot more. Anyway, I just think that's interesting. Verse 16 back in our text. Abraham hearkened unto Ephron, and Abraham weighed to Ephron the silver which he had named in the audience of the sons of Heth. 400 shekels of silver, current money with the merchants. And the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field and the cave, and the trees of the field, were all in the borders round about. They were made sure. They were part of the purchase. Unto Abraham for a possession in the presence of the children of Heth before all that went in at the gate of the city. The only other place that Abraham is said to have claimed was the well, wasn't it, that he dug before Abimelech. But back in chapter 21, I think it is. But here, Abraham has the only possession he'll ever have. It becomes ultimately the burying place not just of Sarah, but of Abraham and of Isaac and of Rebekah and of Jacob and of Leah. And there's a statement that's made over in Acts chapter 7 when Stephen is giving his defense, I guess we say. In Acts chapter 7, he goes back to the story of Abraham. Verse 4 of Acts 7 reads, Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran, and from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into the land wherein ye now dwell, and he gave him none inheritance in it, no, not so much as to set his foot on. Yet he promised that he would give it him to him for a possession, and to his seed after him, when as yet he had no child. And we come to the point, why is the burial place so much a stress here in this passage? And I don't know that I know, but one thing that occurs to us is that when Abraham was looking to bury his dead, he did not think about going back to Mesopotamia, not just for practical reasons, but I think because he believed the promise. This is the land. He doesn't own anything but this field here that he just bought. But God promised, not in my lifetime, but in the lifetime of my descendants, this is the place. This is home. And therefore, he buried his dead. In the same way, and don't you think about Joseph. What did Joseph say to his brethren down in Egypt at that time?
When I'm dead, when the Lord brings you up out of this place, take my bones with you.
That's it. Because he knew. In fact, that I think is what the Hebrew writer camps on as being a great moment in Joseph's faith. I know God is going to fulfill his promise. So maybe the reason why so much emphasis is placed here, it's another way in which Abraham expresses his faith. This is home. We don't own anything but this spot you can see right here. But one day God's going to give our family all of this. So this is where I will bury my beloved one. It's where he will be buried. By the way, it's where Jacob came back to be buried as well. They brought him back to bury him, even though he was living in Egypt at the time of his passing. So, I think it's another great statement of Abraham's trust in God's word. Verse 19, to finish it out, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of Machpelah before Mamre, the same as Hebron in the land of Canaan, and the field and the cave therein were made sure unto Abraham for a possession of a burying place by the sons of Heth. Any further thoughts about chapter 23? Yes, sir.
To your point about the cost that he paid
Yeah.
in that 400 shekels of silver today, based on silver's market price, is approximately $4,600 to $5,000. However, in terms of purchasing power or economic significance in Abraham's time, it could equate to somewhere between $192,000 and $624,000, depending on the valuation method. So that's just
Right.
nice calculation.
Right. That's interesting, though. It's hard, I think, sometimes. Then, of course, that would be dated to whenever that was written. It may have gone up since then, you know. But I think it seems to be pretty clear. It was not cheap. It wasn't a cheap price he paid, was it? Yes, sir. Thank you. Someone else have a point. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, in a land like Israel, in an area like the Middle East, you don't dig up your farmland to bury people. There's not an overabundance of it. Now, there's enough in this land, why it's called the land of milk and honey, but, a cave, one being, is a good ready-made place for a tomb. And time is, once again, of the essence here, for one, but for two, you're not giving up valuable grazing and farming land that people need.
Right.
To bury people. It's not like we're so used to having huge cemeteries out here because, land is plentiful in our country. But, if you go over to Europe and look at a lot of these countries, there's not a lot of extra land around some of these places for this kind of thing. And so, there's especially not that all of Israel is about a quarter of the size of Alabama. This is not an area that's conducive for, have extra land.
Yeah. Very good. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned Abraham not returning to Mesopotamia to bury Sarah. It's interesting also in Hebrews 11, there in verse 15, after talking about Abraham and Sarah there, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have returned. Verse 16 tells us that they were looking forward to a heavenly country. So it may even be Abraham was so insistent on burying his dead in this promised land because he was looking to the promised land. That he knew also promised.
It just speaks to his faith in general, doesn't it? He just trusts God, and he knows that also that what he sees is not all there is. That's a great thing. Yes, sir.
The other interesting thing to know about the chapter, really, of Sarah's life, because this is about the men. It has the women, but it's about the patriarchs and their faith and the lineage thing, and they have things that their wives did that are important to the story. But the minutiae of their life is not given in great detail. But it's interesting that Sarah is the only one, I believe, in Genesis that we have her age when she died. It actually even it tells us that seemed to lend an importance to Sarah above all of the other women there in that as well.
When Peter is looking for an example to teach women how to live, he goes back to Sarah. Even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters ye are, if you do well. And it's interesting to note that Sarah lived about as far removed from Peter's time as Peter does from our time. She was a timeless example and still is. So, she was a great, great woman. Somebody else have something here. Thank you. So, let's look, we can at least start reading in Genesis 24. Talking about not going back to Mesopotamia. That fits the story here, doesn't it? Abraham was old, well stricken in age, and the Lord blessed Abraham in all things. What a great epitaph. Then verse 2. And Abraham said to his eldest servant, You reckon this was Eleazar? We hadn't read about him in a long time. Was it another one? We don't know. He doesn't tell us. But he was the eldest servant of his house that ruled over all that he had. He was sort of the Joseph if Abraham is Potiphar. You know, he's the fellow who knows it all and runs things. And he said, I pray thee, put thy hand under my thigh, and I will make thee to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, the God of earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. And thou shalt not go, rather, verse 4, thou shalt go unto my country, unto my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac. And the servant said to him, well, what if she's not willing to come? Can I take your son back? No, you will not take my son back over there from where I came. Beware that you do not do it. Verse 7, the Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and which spake unto me, and that sware to me, saying, unto thy seed will I give this land, he shall send his angel before thee, and thou shalt take a wife unto my son from thence. And if the woman is not willing to follow thee, you're clear of the oath. Only do not bring my son, to the land that we left. Don't take him back there. And the servant put his hand under his thigh. I can't get quite the picture, but it's almost the idea of just leaning in Abraham's face. A very intimate, close promise that's made here, swearing to him concerning this matter. And that's what you read about in the 24th chapter of Genesis, is the choosing of a wife for Isaac, not from the Canaanites. He does not want that influence on his son, but rather one from his relatives. Question and point about the first few verses of this chapter. Yes, sir.
This comes back again to how impressive a leader Abraham must have been for the servants in his house. You know, they're so loyal to him, that they believe in him so much, that they were all willing to be circumcised. This, the oldest servant that would have inherited everything, does not seem to harbor any ill will towards his son, even though the sons that come along that's basically the way what he would have had for an inheritance, a pretty impressive inheritance, and all that. It just goes to show. There's a lot that's not explicitly said here but I mean, I wouldn't say it's wrong to read into it. Here's just how good of a leader he was and how much faith they had in him.
Yeah. Abraham wasn't no Sunday Christian, was he? Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much.